Our guest today, Neal McCready of rebelgrove.com. We are continuing our series of football previews for the 2022 season. Neal, thanks for joining us today. You have covered a very interesting situation at Ole Miss in the last few months with Lane Kiffin. One foot in Ole Miss, 1 foot in Auburn, or however you want to describe it. What a weird fall you were coming off of.
Oh, it was all just made up by the media. I don't know if you heard that. This was completely a media creation. Some people have said even I was maybe orchestrated it, and so I'd like to use this opportunity to come clean. Middle of October, I thought to myself, this beat needs some drama, and
who better?
I was getting ready to Lane Kiffin was getting ready to do his Monday press conference, and I arranged for Brian Harsin to be fired at Auburn. And just as Lane walked in, and I immediately asked Lane about, in a roundabout way, about the Auburn vacancy. And off to the races we went. I then called Pete Thamel, Chris Lowe, just a handful of kind of the national writers. And I was like, hey, guys, I was kind of wondering if you'd help me with something. And they're like, yeah, sure, Neal, what? Anything. And I said, could you mention that Lane Kiffin's probably the leading candidate for the Auburn job, and that's who Auburn has targeted? And they said, sure. And I called Brandon Marcello, and I was like, yes, kind of wondering if maybe you would just really dive in on this Kiffin to Auburn thing. And he's like, well, there's nothing to that, right? And I was like, yeah, I get that, Brandon, but we're just trying to get this going. And he said, yeah, sure. And so he did. And it just kind of took on a life of its own. And, I went even back to Lane at one point because we're really tight personally. And I said, hey, I know you love Ole Miss more than life itself and that you would never go anywhere. But this thing has kind of started to go, and we're to a point where we're going to need your help. And he goes, hey, look, I'll do anything for you because I love, local beat writers. And I said, cool. And he played along, and, we fooled a lot of people. And Lane got a massive raise out of it. It scared the hell out of Ole Miss and Keith Carter. And Lane's making $9 million a year right now. And I got this fun story to cover for 2 months that was great. And yeah, but there's nothing to it. He's never leaving Ole Miss. He loves it.
The power we have to speak things into existence is just amazing.
And listen, I'd like to take this opportunity because Pete Thamel has me blocked on Twitter, but for him to take the time that he took, right, and to sort of risk his professional reputation just to advance the narrative that I was trying to advance was really cool of him. I will forever be grateful.
Phil Steele and his football issue, he has like this thing of all people that follow him on Twitter. Do you have like a wall of blocks?
I don't know. I am blocked by every once in a while. I'll find out that I'm blocked, and I think it has nothing to do other than my political orientation. I think it is that simple. Yeah. And it's funny. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, Auburn targeted Lane Kiffin. Auburn wanted Lane Kiffin. Auburn intended to hire Lane Kiffin. And I believe that up until the Tuesday or Wednesday of the final week of the regular season, Ole Miss finished its season on Thanksgiving night against Mississippi State. I think up until that Tuesday or Wednesday, I really believe Lane Kiffin either intended to go or was very seriously contemplating going. And then he didn't, and he stayed, and he got a massive raise out of it. And he did some damage to his Q rating here. There's no question about that. He, on the flip side, got the NIL people pretty damn motivated one way or the other, which was, I guess, a positive. And look, at the end of the day, you're if someone wants to talk to you about a job, you owe it to yourself sometimes to listen. I said all along I didn't think Auburn was a good fit for him for a number of reasons. I covered Auburn for 6 years as a beat writer. I was in Alabama for a long time. I kind of understand the lay of the land there a little bit. And I didn't think that Lane Kiffin and Auburn were a very good fit, which of course made me a raging Ole Miss homer to everybody outside of Ole Miss, except for the Ole Miss people who hate me because I don't cheer for Ole Miss. So it was a complicated time, Chris. There was a lot there, for this life of a sports writer thing it's pretty dramatic.
It can be, I hear. Oh, we could go so many places with that, but we'll go to the quarterback room because that's an interesting situation. I've heard you talk about that. You have three guys who I presume all feel like they're the number one, two who have been number ones before, and Walker Howard, who was a pretty good number 3 at LSU last year. How does that all shake down in the spring and fall?
It's a hell of a good question. Lane addressed it on Wednesday, National Signing Day, Part 2. He said that it's his job to put together the best roster possible. It's his job to put together the deepest, most talented roster possible. And he's done that in the quarterback room. Jackson Dart started 12 of 13 games. I thought Jackson was really good last year for a 19-year-old first-year starter. Wasn't perfect, made some mistakes, needs to improve, and he's going to be challenged. They signed Walker Howard out of LSU, or transferred him out of LSU. I guess you don't sign him, he just enrolls. Former 5-star player, Jamie Howard's son, was happy at LSU, but just realized that he was probably going to be the number 3 guy again. So he wanted to go someplace where he'd get more meaningful reps and get more development and continue to progress towards his objective, which is being a quarterback in the National Football League. So if you just pay attention to the promises that were made, promise might be too strong, but come on, right?
Yeah.
If you're selling something, even if I don't use the word I promise, I'm kind of promising. I think Walker Howard's going to be the number 2. So unless you do the co-starter thing, which won't work, either Jackson Dart or Spencer Sanders is probably going to be a third-team quarterback. Yeah. Which means they're going to be an unhappy quarterback, which means probably one is leaving, is my guess. I don't know how that works. Jackson could still transfer the traditional way someplace. He could sit a year and have 2 years to play. But I think a year ago he would have looked at this and said, hey, I might even play one more year at Ole Miss and then go pro. Spencer Sanders has been at Oklahoma State for 4 seasons. He's had a roller coaster of a career. But I don't think Spencer Sanders transferred to Ole Miss with the intention of sitting on the bench. I mean, I would venture to guess that he transferred with the intention of being the starting quarterback for his final season of college eligibility. So, here's what's everybody goes, oh, it's going to be a hell of a spring. Yeah, except we've done this before, right, Chris? I mean, at the end of this spring, Lane Kiffin's not going to go, so here's the deal. Spencer's my starter. Walker's my number 2. And he's not going to do that. He's going to say, oh, it's too close to call. It's really close. They're all really did some good things. They all did some bad things. It's going to carry over into the summer, into camp, because he wants them all on his campus. So at some point, one of these guys has to look in the mirror and go, I don't either. All right, I'm just going to trust it and I'm going to roll with it and risk being the third team guy for a year. Or they're going to say, hey, I can't trust this. I'm going to bolt. And I don't know how that will play out. But the people that are like, oh, it's going to make the spring fascinating. I mean, yes and no. I watched last year where I was convinced Lane Kiffin wanted Jackson Dart to be his quarterback, but he did not want Luke Altmaier to leave. And they milked that all the way into the Georgia Tech week in week 3 or 4 of the season.
Yeah, you beat me to where I was going next. That the schedule last year to start the first 6 weeks or so left a lot to be desired. Now, this year they start with Mercer, I think Tulane, which I believe is supposed to be pretty good, and Georgia Tech, which ended last year on an upswing. He sort of used,
and then
September is a preseason almost. I don't know if he's got the luxury of that again this year to decide who his quarterback is.
Did you see he was in week 4? Did you?
Yeah, that would be Alabama.
Yeah,
on the road.
No, September's not going to be. Last September was like Central Arkansas and Troy. They ended up playing a really good Troy team, but John Summerall's a friend, and it was interesting. It's the first clue that I had that, boy, a couple of things. A couple of clues on a couple of things. I went to it's a Thursday night, middle of the season game in Mobile between South Alabama and Troy. Kane Womack and John Summerall are both friends of mine. And I went to the game, and talked to both of those guys before the game, and John was talking about, I don't think he'd mind me saying this now, I said, man, your team is so much better than it was in week one. And he was like, yeah, we didn't even know how to line up in week one. It was his first game as Troy's coach, and he goes, we were just trying to get guys lined up and stuff. He goes, I'd like to play them again. And I thought, that's interesting. And he was like, he kind of stopped. He's like, because we're about to play Army. I'd rather test my team against another team like that. I'd be curious to see what we've done. I thought to myself, he thinks if they played Ole Miss again, they'd win. And now Troy ended up going 11, and they lost 2 games. They lost to Ole Miss, and they lost on that crazy freak out play against Appalachian State.
Yeah,
that day in Boone. But other than that, they won the rest of the games, won the Sun Belt, won their bowl game, all that stuff. But my point is that after Troy, Ole Miss played like Central Arkansas. They went to Georgia Tech, and it was right when Georgia Tech was getting ready to fire their coach, and Georgia Tech sucked. And they played a Tulsa team that fired their coach, and Tulsa kind of played Ole Miss close. And then they played Kentucky in their first SEC game and won only because
that call.
Kentucky ran a beat too fast. If Levis just takes an extra beat, they win that game. But they won that game, and then they played at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt led at the half. My point, Chris, is that there were signs all year that, man, this team's not what everyone says it is. It's good. Then they played Auburn, and they jumped out to a huge lead, and Auburn came charging back and made that interesting. And then they lost 5 of their last 6 games. So to your point, no, look, the schedule, Ole Miss people get irritated when you say this. The game in New Orleans at Tulane's new stadium in week 2 is going to be a challenge. Now, I'm not saying Ole Miss won't win. In fact, if you made me predict it today, I probably would predict that Ole Miss will win. But Tulane just went, 12-2 and won the Cotton Bowl, beat USC. The quarterback's back for another season. That'll be a challenge. That's going to be. You don't think they'll be psyched up to have Ole Miss in their new stadium in New Orleans, do you? I mean, it's going to be different than back in the day when Ole Miss would go to the Superdome to play a bad Tulane team, and there'd be 35,000 people in the dome, 30,000 of which were Ole Miss fans, who made it a fun weekend in New Orleans. It won't be that way this time, so it'll be more of a challenge. And then Georgia Tech will be better, but Ole Miss will beat Georgia Tech at home. And then it's at Alabama. It's LSU at home. It's Arkansas at home. They still got to go to Georgia. They trade Kentucky at home for a trip to Georgia. They trade Tulsa at home for a trip to Tulane. That's not a good trade. And, it's a tough schedule. And there are a lot of questions on the defensive side of the football that they've got to address and address quickly. And here's the thing that's fascinating to me about teams like Ole Miss. There's lots of them. So this is not me picking on Ole Miss, but Kiffin has steered hard into the transfer portal. And he acknowledged this. He would, if he were sitting here right now, he would begrudgingly shake his head in agreement, I think. When you bring in so many people from so many different places with so many kind of different agendas, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just they're trying to get to the league and stuff. When you bring those people in, I think if you get off to a great start, you're okay. Because winning covers up so much. But if you get into adversity and you start losing and guys are like, I don't really care. I mean, I'm just here for a year. Or, I spent most of my career at X. I think chemistry, culture become issues. Kiffin, to his credit, has talked about culture a lot. It's a concern of his. So that will be kind of interesting to follow because they're going heavy in the portal. They're going to go heavy in the portal in May. They're going to add more guys. So you're bringing in a lot of people who haven't been around each other very long. The bonds aren't super deep. And sometimes it takes a long time to build culture in a program. And if you don't have but a couple months to do it, it doesn't get done.
Well, Neil, everybody's incentives are all over the place in college, and it's just made for madness these days.
Yeah. And before anybody thinks I'm picking on Ole Miss, this is, what I just described,
it's everywhere.
What I just described with Ole Miss, you probably could do it with 60 programs.
Yeah. Well, I think even the ones that try to run a program more traditionally are faced with that. Well, we got a kid who's a backup, and if he doesn't get his time, he's going elsewhere. So,
Oh yeah, no, it's completely changed the way you can coach. It's completely changed the way you can build. It probably changes the way you evaluate. It's. I do a show twice a week with Tyler Siskey, and
which is
Tyler.
amazing, by the way.
Thank you. If you listen to the most recent one, make sure if there are young people around that you use headphones. Tyler's a former recruiting coordinator at Ole Miss. He was a former wide receivers coach at South Alabama. He was on Nick Saban's staff at Alabama, played at Auburn, played at Troy. In other words, knows his stuff. And Tyler is literally convinced that the only solution to what is happening in college football today is to put it in reverse, go back, and change the transfer rule back to what it was.
Yeah.
He says that's it. It's not about NIL. It's not about the pay for play. You can whatever. But that this transfer portal thing has made it unmanageable.
Yeah.
And honestly, as much as I kind of want to disagree with him for the sake of the show, I think he's right.
Yeah. I think the NCAA sprung too many changes on us at once. You can't allow that many variables. Yeah.
In fairness to the NCAA, and I don't say that very often, but
they got hammered for years for not doing this.
They fought really hard to hang on to the model because they knew that if you start letting it go a little, there was never going to be a compromise. There was never going to be the other side was never going to be, okay, well, that's enough. No, they were always going to ask for more. I mean, we watch this in our society today.
Yep.
There is no turning back. There is no context. Nobody, no. Hey, let's get that statue of Columbus down. That's going to change things. It's the okay, let's do NIL. No, let's go all the way with transfers. You can transfer. I mean, if they had it their way, it would be unlimited transfers.
Yeah.
And so, there was a fight to get that. And so that's the line in the sand. And I just don't know that the NCAA has the stomach to do something right now that's anti-player. But
no,
as long as guys can just pick up and leave, and the tampering portal is what it is. I think you're already seeing it some. A lot of young coaches are getting out. They're trying desperately to get to the NFL. It's everyone talks about college football being super healthy, and they just point at the ratings. They just point at the ratings, the TV ratings. The ratings were sky high. I get it. When the tree dies, you don't notice it right away. Especially if it's a big tree. You don't notice it right away if you're just passing. Tree dies at the roots. People better be careful with what they're watching with college football, because I don't know that the average common fan, not the diehard fan who subscribes to our sites, but the average fan who goes to games, I don't know that this product over the next 4 or 5 years, when they go to a game and they're like, I don't know any of these guys. I don't know that that's what works. We'll see.
Back to the roster for a couple minutes before I let you go.
Okay.
Ole Miss lost a number of skill guys. Malik Heath is gone. Jonathan Mingo is gone, I believe. Zach Evans is gone. But they do have Quinshawn Judkins, who's a stud. How does it look in terms of the skill position guys and the guys up front who are going to be blocking for whoever the quarterback will be?
Skill guys, they have Quinshawn, who's just terrific. They signed Kedrick Riscano, a highly recruited player out of Texas that I'm sure they're hoping comes in and provides some depth. They still have Ulysses Bentley IV, who had a disappointing season last year.
Oh, yeah.
I think still has some real upside. They kind of redid their wide receiver core in the portal. Chris Marshall from Texas A&M, and they signed Aiden Williams out of Ridgeland High School here in Mississippi. Some other guys too. Jordan Watkins is back. I mean, I think they feel like they're going to be okay there. I think people are going to come to appreciate just how good Jonathan Mingo was. And Malik Heath was terrific last year for Ole Miss. I mean, a lot of people thought, he was just kind of going to be a throwaway, and he was not. He was terrific. They went out and added Caden Prescorn, the tight end from Memphis, who they're excited about. They still have Michael Trigg, who had an up and down season last year, has a world of potential, just hasn't put it all together just yet. Offensive line, they lose Nick Broker, but everybody else is back. They added a couple of guys from the portal. I think they feel like they'll be okay there, if at a minimum, maybe good. They've got the two young tackles who both have really high upsides that they need to take they have to become more consistent players, but you'd expect that. Offensively, I think, look, assuming they can get the quarterback thing worked out and assuming that Chris Marshall can live up to his potential at wide receiver, they added Trey Harris from Louisiana Tech, who was a really good receiver there. I think, and it's Lane Kiffin. His team score points. They always do. He's an absolute genius in the run game. Their ability to create running game week after week after week, doing it different ways is elite. I think offensively they're going to be a good team.
Defense is the question. Lane Kiffin always seems to figure out the offense. They lose, let's see, the top four tacklers in Brown, Reese, Johnson, and Finley, lose some other guys down the line. Does this get better? Does this get worse, and why?
It's too early to say. I think they're going to have to get in the portal in May and probably fill in some gaps. Pete Golding came over from Alabama as the new defensive coordinator. I thought Pete did a good job at Alabama. They're going to completely revamp schematics, apparently. I think they're going to the 3-4, getting out of the 3-2-6 that they've been running. They're going to go to a more traditional 3-4 with two corners, two safeties, bring in the nickel, all that stuff. But no, look, they got to add personnel. I mean, there's no Will Anderson on this defense. There's no Branch on this defense. That doesn't exist. There's no Jaheim Otis on this defense. Those cats aren't at Ole Miss right now. So they've got to figure out how to go get those guys. They've got a incredible 5-star linebacker coming in from Mississippi, Centurine Perkins, but he's got to put some weight on. He's walking in probably at about 210 pounds. He gets compared to Harold Perkins, the talented linebacker at LSU last year. I mean, there's some pieces, but they've got to go recruit more. They've got to become more effective recruiting defensive linemen and linebackers than they've been in the previous seasons at Ole Miss. And I mean, if you look at Ole Miss down the stretch, everybody talks about the Kiffin stuff with Auburn, and I do think that was a factor. But that wasn't the reason that one play into the second half, Arkansas had 42 points on Ole Miss's defense.
Yeah.
You can talk about the referees missed some calls, and they took a couple of touchdowns away from Ole Miss, all that. And there's some validity to all that. You gave up 42 points in just over a half. I mean, you got blitzed. They lost to Mississippi State because they really just couldn't stop them. They couldn't stop LSU in the second half. Jaden Daniels ran wild on them. A&M played well enough offensively to beat Ole Miss. They just couldn't stop Jackson Dart and Quinshawn Judkins and those guys, and they were able to win that game that night in College Station. And they won one of their last 6 games. I mean, you can pin that on Lane Kiffin drama if you'd like to. I think that's flawed. I mean, I think that's part of it. But they didn't lose those games just because everybody on the team was like, what do you think is – they weren't in the huddle each time going, you think coach is going to stay or leave? I mean, that's not how it works.
Well, to that, and this will be the last thing before I get you out of here, this schedule, we mentioned the start is tougher this year, and then they go at Alabama, LSU, Arkansas, bye week, at Auburn, Vandy, A&M, at Georgia. But before the huge showdown with ULM, which we all have circled on the calendars, and then that game against Mississippi State.
It's brutal.
That is one heck of an ending.
It's a very tough schedule. I think it's a tough schedule from week 2. I mean, I think the Tulane game is a game you have to at least circle, and then, Georgia Tech will be better. At Alabama, you have to go to Georgia. You have to go to Auburn. You don't think Hugh Freeze is going to want that game, do you? You got to go to Mississippi State. It's always tough to win at State when you're wearing Ole Miss uniform. They just get up for that game. It means so much to that place. There just aren't a lot of gimmies on the schedule. Even the games that people are going to write down as, oh, that's a gimme. People are going to do this with Arkansas. They're going to do it. Everyone's going to go, that's a W. Well, in the last 2 years, when Ole Miss has played Arkansas, they won by 1 point at home on a crazy play where, with time expired, Sam Pittman said, "Let's just go for it." And they didn't get the 2-point conversion and they lost. So they were literally, you beat Arkansas by 1 play at home. And last year you were down 42-6 in the third quarter, or 42-7 or whatever it was. I don't know how you look at that game and go, W, that's a win. And that's what we do, right? And I mean, look, I think Vanderbilt's going to be better. Vanderbilt's got a couple of SEC wins now. Clark's kind of got a little culture shift going. You could see it when I was there covering the Vanderbilt Ole Miss game in whenever that was, October, I think. You could sort of see he was getting a little bit of buy-in. It was kind of the I think I can up the mountain kind of deal. And they were still down at the bottom of the mountain and they were still trying to chug along, but they hadn't given up. I could tell they hadn't given up. They were still trying to figure out how to get the train up the mountain a little bit. And you saw that with a couple of wins that they got. So I expect they'll be better. I expect they'll play with more confidence. I mean, I think Ole Miss beats them at home, but my point is that there just aren't the gimmies on the schedule that people think there will be. I mean, they get ULM in November, and in November at ULM, you are locked into your studies. So those kids will have no chance to play a football game because they'll be so focused on their academics. But other than that, there's not a gimme on the schedule after Mercer. It's a tough schedule, and so if you're not much improved on defense, it's going to get challenging. And then you throw in the stuff about, well, if you have some losses early, last year they were 7-0, they were 8-1 at one point. Well, what if you're 4-3? What if you're 3-4? What's the chemistry look like then? How do you handle that kind of adversity? I think that's what people are like me are kind of curious to see.
Well, the other question I have is there is massive potential for it to go the wrong way. I'm not saying it will, but you just outline all the reasons why. And if it does, against the backdrop of what happened last year, how it ended, all the drama with Auburn, does that situation get toxic?
Toxic might be too strong, but people have questions. People get irritated. Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, all the social media stuff and all that stuff goes out the window if you lose. If you're winning, it's adorable and everybody loves it. If you're losing, people, how it is, get off Twitter and fix the team. So now I'll tell you this, he can't do the Auburn thing again.
Yeah, no.
If I get a wild hair in the middle of the year and say I'm going to try to get Lane the Texas A&M job, he's got to put a stop to that.
Right.
He's got to put a stop to it. He can't do that again. He can't run that play again. That playbook is expired.
Neal, you are in the best in the market, you and Chase Parham, at covering Ole Miss. I've been reading your stuff at Rebel Grove for many, many years now. Your podcast network is incredible. The show with you and Tyler Siskey, if you are a college football fan, and especially an SEC fan, and even an NFL fan, it's appointment listening. I want to give you a minute to promote your stuff on the way out.
You just did it. Appreciate that. It's the MPW Digital. MPW Digital is the place to go for all of our YouTube stuff and our podcast and such. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It's free. And, leave a 5-star rating and all that stuff. We'd appreciate it.
Hey, Neal, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we'll catch up with you again between now and the end of football season, and really enjoyed our time.
Chris, always good to be with you. Hope your daughter starts feeling better.
Thank you.
See you.